Hello and welcome to Office Hours out on my balcony out in San Diego. This is an immediate pickup from the last Office Hours. I had said that there were still a ton of questions in there, and I'm comfortable and it's nice outside and I've got the remainders of a gin and tonic, so I'll just pick up right up where we left off. The next question is, Andrew from Canada asks, to null or not to null? That is the question. I've got tables with 100 million to a billion rows. I like that you didn't say that they were large. You gave actual numbers there. And with several columns that contain data 20% of the time, should we still allow nulls or should we set them to an empty or zero value instead? If it's just returned but not queried, does that matter? Here's the thing. When you have an existing table, it probably has existing applications that expect certain columns to have certain values. And you're not going to see a big enough bang for the buck by making them non-nullable and stuffing some magic value in there. You're not going to see a big enough bang for the buck in most cases to warrant all of the work that you have to do in the application to start doing things like looking for that magic value. So leave well enough alone there. That's a good sign that you want to step back a little and start looking at what is my SQL Server's top weight type and what are the queries or indexes causing that weight type. Because it feels like you're looking in a little too closely with the microscope and you're not zooming out to the big picture to say, right, what's the bottleneck and how can I fix that bottleneck? Because I have never seen a server where that was the biggest problem that someone had to focus on. Next up, FARAN says, is separating the data and log files on different physical drives still needed when we use solid state? Separating data and log files hasn't been really that useful for more than a decade. And if you search for Brent separate data and log file drives, I've got a blog post kind of debunking it. But just to kind of give you the quick rundown, every now and then you'll hear someone say, well, you should put the log files on a separate drive so that you can do a tail of the log backup whenever the data file drive dies. Well, does adding more drives make the server more reliable? What are the odds that the data file drive will go down, but the log file drive will still be up? And didn't you just introduce another option for failure? If you're saying that the odds are high, well then isn't there a chance that the log file drive will go down and the data file drive will still be up? In that case, you can't take a tail of the log backup, and in fact, you just introduced a new single point of failure. Adding more single points of failure doesn't make an infrastructure more reliable. It makes that infrastructure less reliable. The reason why you see planes with multiple engines is so that if they lose any one engine, everything keeps going. But you don't see planes where if they lose one engine out of 4, the whole plane goes down. And that's what happens when you put the log file on its own drive. That plane is still going down when that engine dies. So it's really weird. I even know people who have a professional job like for a storage company and they're still saying, yeah, you should separate them. And I kind of politely ask, okay, why? Can you give me the scenarios? And why does that make it? And then we drill in and they're like, oh, well, yeah, that actually doesn't work. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. Next up, we have Maciej asks, hi, Brent. Recently, Amazon made available Babelfish for Amazon Aurora Postgres. Could it seriously threaten Microsoft's business model and force them to ship more improvements to the SQL Server engine? I don't think it's going to put Microsoft in trouble anytime soon because what's going to happen is if you're an enterprise, you're probably not going to take that seriously. You're going to want to be fully supported, and fully supported usually means you don't switch out the database engine like doing some kind of switcheroo there. I do think that it's going to tempt some people, but it's going to be a relatively small number overall. Is it going to the second part of your question, is it going to force Microsoft to ship more improvements in SQL Server? Oh, sure, competition is always good. But I think that the competition for Microsoft, it really isn't just Babelfish. It's everything out there. Postgres, MySQL, Oracle. Everybody is really competing as hard as they can to own the data. Because once you own the data, that really dictates where the application has to live. If you code your application for, say, Amazon Aurora, and you use something specific to Aurora, like the way that Aurora handles parallel queries, if you or integrates with AWS Lambda via triggers, let's say, as soon as you start using something proprietary to that vendor, boom, you're locked in. And that's what every cloud vendor wants. They want you to be locked in, and that's why SQL Server has to be in that race to get things that will justify the lock-in. Like what you see with SQL Server 2022 and Azure SQLDB managed instances, the ability to fail over back and forth between managed instances up in Azure and on-premises SQL Server 2022. That's a beautiful lock-in tie-in that makes it easier to justify doing your disaster recovery in Azure rather than doing it in Amazon, because Amazon can't compete with that. So I just love that. That's brilliant. Next up, we have That's All Folks, who says, hi, Brent. Oh, you actually, That's All Folks, you asked that question in another office hours, so go back and watch the replays because it's already been answered. Michael Devor asks, hi Brent, my friend found a plan with a missing index recommendation. For testing it, he created it, but the plan doesn't show it as being used. Could the engine be using some part of the index without reporting it? No, what happened is when SQL Server generates a missing index request, people think that they can just create that as is, but there's a giant catch. If you read the documentation, no, seriously, there's documentation. SQL Server actually has, no, it's called Books Online. I mean, in a long time ago, it was a book, but then there came the internet, and so then they put it online, and so then they called it Books Online, and it's kind of like a book, and I know you don't like reading books. Frankly, I know you don't even like reading. But there's this thing called Books Online, and these are all documented, but I know this comes as news to you, so that is what it is. There's this thing called Books Online that says when SQL Server generates a missing index request, it is just a comma-delimited list of columns to consider indexing, but they're not in the right order. It's up to you to figure out what the order is. Just because it's a create index and it compiles and it executes doesn't mean it's in the right order. And if you want to figure out what the right order is, if you want to, let's say, master the art of index tuning, then it's up to you to either read the documentation, which is for free, or you can pay me to learn how to do mastering index tuning. And let's be honest, we both know which one you're going to pick. Also, thank you for buying my gin. Next up we have MancDBA. MancDBA says, I'm such a jerk. MancDBA says, hi Brent, what are your thoughts on DBA job postings that ask for expert on topics like expert at AlwaysOn or expert at TSQL? You know, I don't look at job postings very often, and I don't know that I've seen that a lot. That kind of surprises me that job postings would ask for that. But I'll continue on with the question. Mank says, I have 10 years of experience. Should I be an expert by now? A friend of mine, Buck Woody, and it's not his saying, but he's a person that I heard it from, so I always quote him, Buck Woody likes to say that some people have 10 years of experience. Some people have 1 year of experience that they've been doing over and over again since the dawn of time. Just because you've been doing for something for 10 years doesn't mean you've been actively learning the whole time about how you do it better. I know some people who just settle into a rut and they cash a check. They never attend a training class. They don't go into presenting to other people. They don't write blog posts. They don't write demo scripts. They're like, well, I learned this in SQL Server 1942, and surely it hasn't changed since then. So it's entirely possible that you've been doing something for 10 years and you're not an expert. On the flip side, if you have been using that thing for 10 years and you've also taken up writing about it, sharing it with other people, mentoring other people in how to do it, developing best practices for a group of people, peer reviewing things that other people are writing for publication, then you might be an expert. So that's up to you to kind of figure out. I know that kind of sucks to hear, right? Because I know a lot of people who just kind of work in an office for 10 years and they're like, I must be an expert by now, and they're just reinventing the wheel. Next up, Faruk says, hi Brent, I want to create a report for our top consuming queries, but some of them are only running Entity Framework. How would you approach this? Well, Faruk, I would go to brentozar.com. Up at the top, I would click Scripts, and then click on SP Blitz Cache. SP Blitz Cache is an open source script that's been out for probably 10 years now that gives you your top 10 most resource intensive queries. You can choose whether to sort by CPU, sort by read, sort by duration, and it works for stored procedures, Entity Framework, and Hibernate, whatever. You can read more about that if you go to brentozar.com and click Scripts up at the top, then click on SP Blitz Cache and go from there. That's how I'd start, because that's what I actually do. Next up, Maciej asks, hi Brent, what was the highest value for missing indexes returned by SP Blitz Index that you've ever seen? The highest one that I've ever seen, I want to say, was originally unearthed by Tara Kaiser back when Tara worked for me. Now she works for Straight Path Solutions. And I want to say that Tara showed me one that was in the quadrillions. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I just remember looking at the number and going, I can't even believe that number was that high. It was just utterly stunning. But millions and billions are no big deal for me. I see those all the time. But I can't remember if it was in the trillions or quadrillions. It was just an insanely high number, and I've never seen anything like it since. Next up, DrDrakken says, hi Brent, learned a lot from your fundamentals training. Good, that's always good to see when I do those training classes for free now and then. I always get really excited when people actually attend because I'm like, look, it's for free. And started my own experiments on cardinality estimation. What I don't understand is that even simple queries with a sort request ask for too much memory, even if returned row estimates are accurate. Okay, so here's the deal. And there could be, man, I'm gonna have water. There are gonna be spots all over. Anybody who jumps to this point in the video isn't gonna understand that this is really just a wet coaster. So what happens is a SQL Server looks at the size of the data types of the columns and assumes that they're half full. So if you take a nullable column, like in the Stack Overflow users table, if you take a nullable column like location, where the vast majority of users never even bother putting in their location, SQL Server thinks that half of those are full, when in reality, most of them are just flat out nulls. So that's typically where overestimation comes from, is oversized columns and columns where the majority of data is null. Next up, Steve says, I know it's Steve E says, I know it's maybe too early to say, but do you think SQL Server 2022 will finally fix parameter sniffing for good? No. If you watch the demo video on that is only like 10 seconds long. And I love Bob Ward to death. Bob Ward is one of the smartest, friendliest, most genuine people that I've ever met. But you can kind of tell when someone's shuffling quickly to get past something. And that was a total demo shuffle. Like, as you can see here, I've lost 30 pounds. Now, if you could please move the camera away quickly so I can breathe again. You know, it just went way too fast. And I immediately was like, wait a minute. A, this requires query store. And B, if it's going to go into query store for every single past parameter, we are utterly doomed. Am I excited that they're making investments in the right direction? Yes. I know that building stuff like this is hellaciously expensive. It's risky. Anytime Microsoft makes a change to the database system, it's a huge risk. It's a risk for their reputation if it backfires, if it produces incorrect query results like the scalar function inlining hot mess did. There are risks for doing that kind of thing, and I'm glad that they're taking risks. So that's good, but is it gonna fix it for good? You could already tell in the demo, I'm like, oh, there be dragons. Next up, let's see here. Next up is, I moved the thing and there it goes. Next up is Mike says, I have heard you mention the cost of SQL Server. At what point should processing be done in the application instead of SQL Server? Every chance you can get. Every chance you can get. If you don't need to do data processing in SQL Server, do it somewhere else. By all means. Every now and then I see people are like, I'm trying to generate an Excel file on the SQL Server. And I'm like, are you out of your mind? No. Just because it can doesn't mean you should. Because by the time you start to do that on a regular basis, boom, there goes your licensing expenses. So I don't know why you wouldn't. Instead of thinking about, hey, how can I use SQL Server to do more work? Think of it as your most expensive coworker. Your most expensive coworker, you don't go in there and go, hey, Alice, could you do me a favor and make me some coffee? Hey, Alice, can you refill the toilet paper? Alice, I think the printer is jammed. No. Most expensive people in the office, like Alice, they tend to have a receptionist, and the receptionist looks like a football player, big, squat, and is stopping people at the door with a big iron fist, going, the hell you're gonna have Alice refill your coffee. No, you go do that yourself. Think of SQL Server as your most expensive coworker, and there needs to be somebody guarding the door. Typically, that person guarding the door is called a database administrator, and they're effectively the database's receptionist, making sure to block at the door any stupid stuff that people are trying to have them get in. FrustratedAnalyst asks, hi Brent, many thanks for hosting these office hour sessions. You're welcome. I get a lot out of them. That's them talking, not me. I get laughs out of them. As an analyst who wants to move over to data engineering or administration, how would I impress potential employers when I don't have much experience in those areas? You can't get a job as a data engineer or a database administrator from a stranger with no experience. So you have a few options. One thing you could do is you could start working with, the data engineers and database administrators at your current company, saying, hey, can I come sit with you? Can I offload work from you? The next time you have an after hours task you need to do, can I be there with you to help? Can I take a second look at the work that you did? Can I proofread things for you in order to slowly start gaining experience so that when one of those people needs a number two or when they leave, you're in a prime position to start to segue into that team in your company. Or when that person leaves to another company, you're in a prime position to follow them. Because if they go and they grow to a newer position, a bigger company, whatever, they're going to need other people with them. Their bosses are going to be, their managers are going to be like, hey, do you know anyone else who can do this kind of work? And you want them to think of you. But getting it from a stranger with no experience, forget about it. It just doesn't work. Next up, Mike asks, Brent, can you change the default SQL Server port years after the SQL Server has been configured? What steps or links can I read before doing this task? I need to do this for IRS audit purposes. You know, it's a shame that the IRS is auditing you. I feel bad for that. Normally when the IRS audits people, what they do is they ask for your tax returns, their expenses, etc. I've never heard of an IRS audit for taxes asking you to change your SQL Server port. I have a hunch that it's not actually the Internal Revenue Service asking you to do this. I have a hunch that it's someone's security team, in which point you want to ask their security team or whoever it is that's telling you you have to do something, great, do you have guidance on how I should do that? And if they say no, I'm kind of suspicious. That would be I'm not even going to get into analogies. I would just kind of stop there. Next up, we have Jim. Jim says, hi Brent, thanks for doing these, you're welcome. We have a vendor app with about 3 terabyte database, mostly in one table because they're doing documents in a database. The database is stored on a SAN LUN. Would you have any recommendations here as to whether or not it would be good to add a database file? No, with a vendor app, I would kind of leave it to the vendor and I would say, okay, look to the vendor, am I your largest client? Or do you have clients larger than me who are happy in terms of performance? And sometimes they'll be able to introduce you to another one of their clients who's happy, and they can give you guidance for things that they've done in order to be happy with their application. But what you'll sometimes find is the vendor will say cagey things like, I'm sorry, we can't give you that information. Or right now you're pushing the limits of you're our largest, you're our flagship customer, which means that they don't really have anybody else who can give you guidance. I would sure hate to have you micromanage their database when you're already pushing the limits as their largest client. So just be careful about getting in there, because they will throw you under the bus faster than you can say quick. So, and adding extra files, I don't, look at what your top weight types are and then look at what the problems are that are causing those weights. Generally speaking, in a document database, you're not going to see storage as the primary bottleneck unless you're doing backups and restores. Backups and restores is kind of different. But based on the vendor name you said about your SAN, about Netapp, you're probably doing SAN snapshot backups anyway, in which case adding additional data files isn't going to help. Plus, adding additional data files is really invasive when you talk about a database of that size, because if you want to evenly balance the load out across all the data files, you're going to have to rebuild indexes, and even just rebuilding them alone won't fix it on a document database. If you've got files inside the database, you have to do some other tricks to move the data across multiple data files. It's really invasive. So, next up, Todd says, you always state that there are enough poorly configured SQL servers to keep us all employed. I'm having a hard time convincing bosses, clients, etc. that SQL Server performance tuning is needed. How do I get this off the ground? So in this, it's hard to go to someone and say, do you want your SQL Server to go faster? What's easier is, and this is going to sound kind of backwards, what's easier is to write blog posts and do presentations about, yo, I make SQL Server go faster, so that when people Google for how do I make SQL Server go faster, they come to you. I used to do what you're talking about. I used to go to a company with a SQL Server and be like, hey, how can I take money from you in order to make your server go faster? And what you find is that most of them are like, you know what, it's fast enough. It's not great, but it's fast enough. And so you can't just go to companies one-to-one directly. What you need to do is establish a shop front and let them come to you. It's kind of like being a shoe repairman. If you were going to repair shoes for a living, you can't really go out on the street and stop people one at a time, grab them by the arm and go, hey, how are your shoes? Do you need your shoes repaired? Because you would never make enough money to be able to get your bills paid. Instead, what you got to do is you got to set up a shop that says, I do shoe repair, and you got to advertise, and you got to get the word out that, hey, look, I do shoe repair, and then people come to you when they have a broken shoe. If you want to learn more about that, search for Brent 500 level guide to careers, and in that, it's a totally free video. It's out on YouTube. It's like 3-4 hours long altogether. I lay out the concepts of inbound marketing versus outbound marketing and explain to you how you go about setting up your storefront for shoe repair, but for SQL Server, so that people come to you rather than you trying to walk through the subway going, hey, I like your shoes. I'd like to fix them for you. Went to a funny, dark place. SayItAintSo asks, do I understand from your Black Friday sale, this is the final time that I'm selling it, that you might be retired? I'm asking for my many friends. So for me, my whole goal has always been, how can I work only enough to take care of the people that I love and spend as much time as I can enjoying myself, enjoying my life. I don't want to work 40 hours a week for forever. So I'm kind of like, I do the bare minimum that I can in order to get by and enjoy myself at the same time. So I am dancing towards retirement as quickly as I can, but know that I'm going to be in the industry for another, 5-10 years probably. But the way that I'm going to be here is different. Just like with these office hours, I do them asynchronously at unpredictable times. I do them with a gin and tonic in my hand. Anybody who wants to get famous in an industry is like, you need to stream at specific known times. You need to be on Twitch and YouTube and Facebook, say every Monday morning at 10 a.m. You need to put together a regular show schedule so people can join you live at those times. I don't do that. Because if I do that, then I got to show up on Monday at 10 a.m. and be in front of a computer. I don't want to do that. So I am totally trying to segue out of doing live classes at specific dates and times. I want my calendar free as much as possible. So that's why I piled up enough money and set aside enough and bought stuff that I need so that I can, after 2022, I can do live classes if I want to, but I don't have to. And instead, I'll just share my knowledge via recorded classes, but that way I can do them whenever I feel like at 7:16 p.m. on I don't even know what day it is, Wednesday. It's kind of nice not having to know what day it is. Next up, Oleg asks, hi Brent, you often mention that you wish developers would do this or that in your trainings. What would be your ultimate checklist or wish list that you would like all database developers to keep in mind when developing a new application? Let me rephrase your question. Brent, in your trainings, you tell us what to do. Is there a checklist that tells us what to do? Yeah, it's my training classes. It's my training classes. You've been through them. That's the point, is you go through the training. Man, this train is loud. Speaking of training, there's something really loud going on down there. Holy smokes, what are they moving? A safe? That's giant. Holy smokes. What the checklist is It's my training classes. That's why I do them, so that people can learn how to do their jobs. If you could do your job with just a checklist, what would be the point of the training classes? I'd just give you the checklist. Maybe I'd charge you $9 for the checklist or something, but I'd just give you a checklist. It's kind of like asking, yes, I understand that you teach a lot of classes about brain surgery. What would be your checklist on how to do brain surgery? If you could do a checklist on how to do brain surgery, we wouldn't have school. It wouldn't work that way. Next up, you can tell I'm kind of deep into the gin and tonic by now. Also, you can tell that I've gotten to the questions that have no upvotes whatsoever, that nobody upvoted at all. And so normally when I'm going through these, I see like questions that have been upvoted by a whole lot of people. There are no upvotes at all on these, and so the question quality is kind of bad. Is that going to stop me? No, I'm probably going to take a few more of these. Torben says, hi, during rollback and database recovery, we ask for the status, but the percent count fluctuates up and down. I would like to know why the number is fluctuating. So what's happening is SQL Server's reading through the transaction log and discovering what it needs to do. And if there's a whole lot that needs to be done as it's reading through, you're going to get worse and worse situations. What I would say is if this is a problem that you hit on a regular basis, I would question your life decisions. I would question why you're having to do rollbacks and recoveries so often. When I see this, it's typically because applications have really long-running transactions that have been going for hours, changing all kinds of things, and we're having unpredictable restarts or failovers, to which I would say, you gotta fix one of those. Either you can't leave a single transaction open for so long, or you got to make the servers more stable so that they're not restarting or failing over all the time randomly. Next, a bunch of these have one upvote, so I'm just going to skip. All right, we're going to skip that. We are going to hit this one. This will be the last one that I have. Hi, Brent. This is looking at procs all day. There are only two more, so I should do both of them. Looking at procs all day asks, hi Brent, love your office hours. A friend of mine just upgraded to SQL Server 2019 at the same time they upgraded their hardware. He's seeing a reduction in CPU and duration of most of the procs, but the query store metric on memory grant has gone up 8x. Is this okay? What your friend most likely did was they did a good thing by upgrading hardware in SQL Server, but they did a bad thing by changing compatibility level on their databases at the same time. Whenever you upgrade, leave the compatibility level where it is for a few weeks, just to weed everything out, to make sure that people don't pin the blame on the database. Because anytime anything changes, people are like, oh, stuff used to be okay, but now it's terrible, when in reality it was probably always terrible. So leave the compat level where it is. Leave it there for a few weeks. When everyone's okay, then flip the compat level if you want to. When you flipped your friend flipped the compat level to 2019, what they didn't understand is that they're on Enterprise Edition. And I'm just betting this is what happens with most of my clients when this happens. They went to 2019 compat level, which engaged batch mode on row store queries, and all of a sudden batch mode takes 20-30x more memory easily for queries, and that's what's causing the higher memory grants. So have your friend ease up on the compat level for a while, make sure that things are okay, and then your friend is going to realize that the memory grants are most likely tied to the change in compat level. Then your friend can check out my mastering query tuning classes. In my mastering query tuning classes, I explain the new features of 2019, like batch mode on row store. I explain where it pays off, where it does not pay off, and the switches that you need to change in order to make it work the best for you. You can learn more about that at brentozar.com/Black Friday. At brentozar.com/Black Friday, there are deep discounts of 70 to 80% off my training classes. I will see you in my next training class. Probably not, because you're on YouTube and you're cheap, but whatever. Yeah, I said that. And then last up, the last one that is also not upvoted, and I skipped originally, but here we are. Data writer says, my friend's table has 25 indexes on it. See, I told you I skipped it, and I was going to skip it for a reason, but here we are. DMDB index usage stats shows that many of the indexes aren't used. His manager isn't a SQL guy. Is there a way to quantify the performance gain from removing these indexes? So when your manager isn't a SQL person, I wouldn't try to convince him with performance. I would actually try to convince him with space. Because dropping those indexes will cut space, which means that your backups are probably going to go faster, your restores are going to go faster, and it leaves you more space for growth for the future without you having to buy more storage. I don't really think that the space is that big of a deal in most servers. However, it's the kind of thing that managers are still really excited by, because managers are still under the impression that storage costs are like, I don't know, $50,000 a terabyte. So if you tell them you saved 50 gigabytes of storage, they're like, oh my God. When in reality, their phone has half a terabyte or a terabyte worth of storage. So if you want to deceive your managers, I suppose that's one way to do it. All right, that completely gets rid of the whole entire queue. That's absolutely amazing. We did good here. So that wraps it up for this office hours. I can now finally go in and go to the bathroom, actually. So I will call it a night here. I'm actually amazed I'm not freezing here, because it seems like it's a little chilly. The weather says it's 59 here, but I will probably go in, go to the restroom, make another gin and tonic, and then go sit out here and watch planes land. There's a noise restriction here in San Diego. I forget what time planes are no longer allowed to take off at, but it does make night plane watching a little less fun. So I will see y'all in the next office hours. Adios.